Alrighty, Viva Frei, Montreal litigator turned YouTuber with a Viva on the Ice update. Except I'm not doing it on the ice because it's a warm spring day, and I found out this morning there are some soft patches on the shoreline. A lot of people have been sending me this story. The British Columbia father, who, according to the headlines, is now in jail for misgendering his child. This story goes back a while, and I actually did a vlog on it. It goes back to the Bill C-16, which is a law in Canada that added gender identity to certain criminal infractions, aggravating factors for certain crimes. Jordan Peterson, at the time, said this is one step closer to legislating language. I did an analysis of the law. It's a long time ago now. I think it's almost 2 years. And people are saying this is the manifestation, the embodiment, what is the word? This is the realization of imprisoning someone for not using proper language. The problem is, as is the case with all of these stories, there's obviously more nuance and more details than a lot of headlines are running with. So going back to the beginning, and the story is just a sad story. It is a father and a mother who obviously are not getting along. They have a child, born female, who wants to transition to male. This started at 12 years old. This has been going on for years. The child got court authorization to transition because British Columbia has a law that allows children to make certain health decisions, although I know people are going to object to that term in this context, but to make certain decisions regarding their health and body, notwithstanding parental objection, if they have a doctor who says it's okay and approves of it for the well-being and health of the child. So this kid got permission from the court to transition, notwithstanding the father's objection. In the context of that lawsuit, which was a civil suit, the father was restrained by the court. There was not a restraining order, but rather there was an order requiring the father not to misgender his child because the judge said in one of the judgments, this could be tantamount to family abuse, systemic, repeatedly misgendering your child who insists on going by another gender. And people took issue with that judgment back then. And again, having not seen the courtroom, having not seen what went on, the dynamic between the judge and the parties, I may disagree with the judgment in principle, but one could imagine a situation where, take out gendering as the issue, but repeatedly using certain terminology with a kid and it bothers the kid, where it could, according to some judges, be deemed to be psychological abuse. So that's what happened. The court issued an order enjoining the father not to misgender his kid because it could be considered family violence. The father nonetheless did it. The court order also prohibited the father from disclosing his kid's name, certain issues relating to the medical condition, publicly discussing the case, and publicly identifying the doctors involved in the case. And again, publication bans, which we're going to get into because there was one issued in this case, but court orders enjoining people from being able to freely discuss litigation should be the utmost of the exception and by no means the rule. This case, you're dealing with a minor, so there's that issue that, yes, you should not publicly disclose the names of minors, not their medical conditions either, even if it is a matter of national importance, legislative importance. So the court order was there, and the father deliberately and repeatedly breached it. He's going to say in protest for what he believes in, and a lot of people are going to agree with that. But he nonetheless knowingly, admittedly violated that court order. Violated it in terms of discussing the case and publicly identifying the doctors. And so he was held in contempt of court, which then gave birth to these criminal proceedings. And from what I understand, additional orders enjoining him again to not publicly discuss the case, not identify himself or his kid or the doctors involved. And apparently he did it again. And that is the reason for which he's being detained now. The judge, agree or disagree with it, says I can't release him because he repeatedly violates the court orders enjoining him not to talk about the case, not to publicly identify his kid, not to publicly identify the doctors, because this is a very passionate debate. And merely by virtue of identifying the doctors, they get harassed, they get threats, etc., etc. Now, again, a lot of people are going to say, too bad, you want to be an expert in a court case, you relinquish your rights to anonymity. There's some very scary things to think about anonymous doctors in court proceedings giving advice that leads to certain consequences for patients. And all of this happens in the context of court files for which there's a publication ban. The medical experts are not identified, neither are the parties. I mean, this is basically closed courtroom in all respects, not just to protect the minor, but to protect the experts. So some people might rightly object to that. Bottom line, and it's by the individual's own admission, we can't identify him. I think his initials are CD. By his own admission, he gave an interview to a number of outlets outside the police station before he went in. He said, yes, I gave a speech somewhere where they identified me to discuss the issue. He also admitted that he put up, I think it was on his fundraising page, a documentary that identified the doctors and other medical information about the case, notwithstanding the court order not to do it, notwithstanding his multiple prior breaches. And so, you know, more laws, less justice to some, but he admitted it.
The two allegations in terms of what's happening today, and it's a bit confusing because I also have a criminal trial coming up in April, which goes back to me breaking the conduct order, which has expired. But in between that date being set and now is the fact that I have continued apparently to talk, and it has to do with my Go Get funding page, where I put up a documentary for Family Wash International where doctors' names are mentioned. And then of all the ridiculous things, I did a speech at the Hilton in Victoria on behalf of Jen Smith, who was running to be a member of the Legislative Assembly, where Jen calls me up and mentions my first name. That's it.
And so now it's, you know, the consequences of having deliberately, repeatedly violated a court order, not just in terms of misgendering his kid, in identifying his kid, disclosing medical information about his kid, and disclosing the names of the doctors. Now, you may think he has the right to do it, and some of you might consider this to be a distinction without a difference, but it's important to know the details, because a lot of people are running with the oversimplified headlines, either through ignorance or through oversimplification, that he's being jailed for misgendering his daughter. The circumstances might have been different if that were the only issue. But the matter of fact in this case is that it wasn't just a question of misgendering his daughter, it was a question of publicly identifying his kid, publicly disclosing medical information about his kid, and publicly disclosing the names of the doctors involved, notwithstanding a court ban not to do it for obvious reasons. And, you know, I don't generally approve of publication bans, and to the extent that they're necessary, they should be as limited as possible. And I do tend to think that medical experts, in the context of a case involving a minor, the minor deserves protection, and the minor requires protection. I'm not convinced that medical experts who are standing behind their science need to be standing behind anonymity. But that's a separate discussion, and that goes above and beyond, you know, the ultimate outcome in this case. It's an act of protest. The father did it, and from what I understand also in front of the judge, apparently from what was quoted in the National Post, he recognized he may have gone too far. And he asked for permission to remove the stuff, says he can't remove the infringing, violating materials from jail. And the judge said, well, you've had more than enough time to do this already. This is repeated behavior. And what can a court do? I mean, he's protesting and the court is enforcing their orders, regardless of whether or not they are justifiable in a free and democratic society in the first place. You know, and it goes back to the publication ban. There's a publication ban about this case. So in as much as people are freaking out about the father being jailed for violating the court order, you know, if media outlets violate the publication ban, they will be sanctioned. And it may not be right that there's a publication ban in the first place. I objected to the publication ban when there was one on Tommy Robinson's case. Everyone's, full-grown adults. Publication bans in contexts like that seems more like it's intended to hide the case as opposed to protect the vulnerable individuals who may be involved in the case. In this case, there's a vulnerable individual who's a minor. Whether or not the publication ban should apply to the father himself or the doctors is a debate. It's a debate worth having. But the reality is, in this case, it's covered by the publication ban, and any outlet that outs the doctors will get sanctioned as well. For right or for wrong, more laws, less justice, arguably, but that's the reality. And it does bring up the freedom of speech debate. I think at one point in the court file, the judge said, you can talk. You just can't identify your kid. You can't talk about the medical conditions, even though this is a national debate right now. And you can't identify yourself. And in the Rebel Media report on this, which I'm going to link below, but I'm going to flash a clip to it now, there was one individual who asked a good question. It's like, you can't talk about freedom of speech when the person speaking can't identify themselves and has to have their face blurred out. You have a non-entity who has been depersoned. Freely speaking, it makes no sense.
Right, but freedom of speech also has to come with freedom of conscience, and it also has to come with things like the freedom to show a picture of your face and to show your name. If I can't show my name, then how do I actually really have freedom of speech? It comes with both things. So if he's not allowed to even state who he is, how does he truly have freedom of speech? There is no freedom of speech. Are we living in a communist country? Like, Canadians need to be very aware of what's going on in our country. We need to be able to speak, and we need to be able to speak with true freedom, not a restricted freedom. That's not freedom.
But there are nuances to this case, and it goes back to the old adage of law: bad cases make bad law. This is a bad case with a bunch of details in it that are very specific to this case, and that this case should now be making law will result in it making bad law. You know, the debate around C-16, Jordan Peterson's compelled language, it's there. This particular case is not proving Jordan Peterson's point entirely. It's proving that we're on a slippery slope. It's not the first case of its nature either, coming out of British Columbia as well. Another decision that I covered were cops who were sanctioned for repeatedly misgendering someone that they arrested. But even in that case, there were details above and beyond the headlines. There was repeated misgendering and other behavior vis-a-vis the arrested individual that created more context than just referring to someone who wants to be referred to as a her, as a he. And in this case, it's a little more complicated. There's a little more nuance. There's a little more distinctions, potentially to some distinctions without a difference, but know them before you get caught repeating a headline, which may not be entirely accurate. So that's the update. As far as everything else goes, live stream tonight with Robert Barnes, live streams every Wednesday with Robert Barnes, and a guest this Wednesday. I forget what date it is, but we're still in the last week of March. Gad Sad in the afternoon at 1:30, and I don't know who our evening guest is right now, but tune in for that. And that's it. Make sure to read more than just the headlines, more than just one source, and know all of the facts. Even if it doesn't change anything, it is better to have come to a conclusion in full awareness of fact and law, as opposed to on what turns out to be inaccurate and incomplete information. Peace out.